What happens when 4,000 government careers are erased with the stroke of a pen? Imagine dedicating 15 years of your life to public service, becoming an expert in your field, only to receive a letter informing you that your position no longer exists. Not because of your performance, not because of budget cuts, but because of politics. Today, we take you inside one of the most dramatic government shakeups in modern American history. You'll witness the human cost of political decisions as Sarah Bennett, a respected energy policy analyst, navigates the sudden collapse of her career and everything she's worked for. This isn't just another political story. It's a powerful human drama about career identity, workplace loyalty, and the impossible choices we face when our professional world is turned upside down. Welcome to Story-Driven English, where we transform real-world events into immersive narratives that dramatically improve your English vocabulary and comprehension. I'm Hostname, and today's story will take you deep inside the corridors of power in Washington, D.C., revealing how high-level political decisions ripple through thousands of lives. Before we begin, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now. Our channel delivers weekly stories based on current events, carefully crafted to build your English skills naturally through engaging storytelling. Join our community of number English learners who are mastering the language without memorizing boring word lists or grammar rules. Now, let's step into Sarah Bennett's world as she receives the news that will change everything. The civil service shake-up. The morning was unusually cool for Washington in April. A light mist hung over the Potomac, shrouding the monuments in a dreamlike haze as Sarah Bennett made her way across the Roosevelt Bridge. 15 years as a policy analyst at the Department of Energy had conditioned her to appreciate the quiet moments before diving into the bureaucratic machinery of federal government. Today, however, her typical morning routine carried a weight of apprehension. Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. She pulled it from her pocket, squinting at the screen. The headline made her stomach drop: Federal Judge Rules Against Union Challenge to Administration's Mass Layoff Plan. She took a deep breath, slipped the phone back into her coat, and quickened her pace. By the time Sarah reached the imposing glass and steel building that housed the Department of Energy, small clusters of employees had gathered in the lobby, their hushed conversations creating a collective murmur of anxiety. She spotted her colleague Michael Rodriguez by the security desk, his expression grave as he scrolled through news on his tablet. "So you've seen it," he said as she approached, foregoing their usual morning pleasantries. Sarah nodded. "Just got the alert. Do we know any details?" Michael handed her his tablet. Judge Eleanor Montgomery ruled that the administration's Agenda 47 restructuring plan falls within executive authority. The American Federation of Government Employees' request for an injunction was denied. The ruling came down late last night. As Sarah skimmed the article, more colleagues joined their impromptu gathering. The mood was somber, faces etched with concern. These were career civil servants who had served through multiple administrations, Republican and Democratic alike. They had weathered policy shifts, budget fluctuations, and changing political priorities. But this felt different, more fundamental, more personal. "The president's been clear about this since taking office," remarked David Chen, a veteran environmental scientist. He campaigned on shrinking what he called the administrative state. "This is just the follow-through." But a 20% reduction across the board, countered Jessica Williams, a budget analyst. That's not strategic restructuring, that's decimation. Sarah listened to her colleagues' debate, her mind racing through potential scenarios. As a senior policy analyst focusing on renewable energy initiatives, her position had always felt relatively secure. But Agenda 47 threatened to redraw the boundaries of federal employment in ways unprecedented in modern governance. "We should head up," she finally interjected. Director Harrington called an all-staff meeting for 9 o'clock. The elevator ride to the 7th floor was silent, each passenger lost in private calculations about their professional futures. Sarah found herself studying the faces around her, wondering which of these familiar colleagues might soon be cleaning out their desks. Director Richard Harrington was a recent appointee, having taken the helm of the department just 2 months earlier. A former energy industry executive with limited government experience, he had initially been viewed with skepticism by career staff. In recent weeks, however, he had demonstrated a surprising willingness to listen to expert input, even when it contradicted administration talking points. The department's main conference room was already packed when Sarah and her colleagues arrived. Staff members stood along the walls and clustered by the doorway, the room's capacity clearly exceeded. Harrington entered precisely at 9, accompanied by the department's general counsel and human resources director. "Good morning," Harrington began, his voice steady but somber. "I'm sure most of you have seen the news about Judge Montgomery's ruling on the AFGE lawsuit. I wanted to address this directly with all of you before rumors and speculation take hold." He paused, surveying the anxious faces before him. "The court has determined that the President's Agenda 47 workforce reduction plan falls within legitimate executive authority. This means that the administration can proceed with implementing reductions in the federal workforce, including at this department." A collective tension seemed to tighten throughout the room. Sarah noticed Michael's hands gripping the back of a chair, knuckles whitening. "I want to be transparent about what this means," Harrington continued. "The directive we've received calls for a reduction of between 15 and 25% of our current workforce, to be implemented over the next 6 months. That translates to approximately 2,400 to 4,000 positions across the Department of Energy and its various divisions." The number hung in the air, its magnitude stunning the room into silence. "I know this is difficult news," Harrington added, his tone softening slightly. "We're still developing the specific implementation plan, which will incorporate both early retirement incentives and, unfortunately, involuntary separations. Decisions will be made based on a combination of factors including seniority, performance reviews, and programmatic priorities as determined by the administration." Sarah felt a hollowness forming in her chest. The clinical language, workforce reduction, involuntary separations, implementation plan, seemed designed to obscure the human reality. Thousands of careers disrupted, lives appended, institutional knowledge lost. After the meeting, Sarah retreated to her office, closing the door behind her, a rarity in her typically open-door management style. She needed space to process the implications, both personal and professional. Her phone rang. It was her husband, James. "Hey, I just saw the news," he said as soon as she answered. "Are you okay?" Sarah sighed, gazing out her window at the Washington skyline. "I don't know. Nobody knows who's safe. Harrington just told us they're cutting up to 4,000 positions. Could you be one of them?" The question lingered uncomfortably. Sarah had always been pragmatic about her career, viewing her role as a professional commitment rather than a personal identity. But after 15 years, the distinction had blurred. Her work on renewable energy policy wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a way to contribute to something larger than herself. "It's possible," she finally admitted. "My division works on climate initiatives, which aren't exactly priorities for this administration." "What about moving to the private sector?" James suggested. "You've had offers before." Sarah had indeed fielded occasional recruitment attempts from energy consulting firms and environmental advocacy organizations. The salary would likely be higher, the politics potentially less frustrating. Yet something had always kept her in public service, a belief that working within government, however challenging, offered the greatest leverage for positive change. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she replied. "Nothing's happened yet." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew that something fundamental had already shifted. The security and stability that had underpinned federal employment for generations, the implicit social contract between government workers and the nation they served, was being rewritten. The department cafeteria buzzed with subdued conversations at lunch. Sarah joined a table where Michael was sitting with Eleanor Park, a lawyer from the department's general counsel office. "What's the read from legal?" Sarah asked as she settled into her chair. Eleanor glanced around before responding, lowering her voice slightly. "The ruling is pretty definitive. Judge Montgomery essentially found that the president has broad authority to reorganize the executive branch, and that includes staffing levels." "But there must be some limits," Michael interjected. "Civil service protections exist for a reason." "True," Eleanor acknowledged. "The ruling doesn't override all civil service laws. The administration still has to follow proper procedures for reductions in force. But it does give them considerable latitude in determining the scope and criteria." "What about the union's next steps?" Sarah asked. "They'll appeal, certainly," Eleanor replied. "But appeals take time, and the administration can proceed with the plan while litigation continues. Unless a higher court issues a stay, which seems unlikely given the reasoning in Montgomery's opinion, the reductions will begin as scheduled." As they spoke, Sarah noticed Director Harrington entering the cafeteria. Unlike many political appointees who maintained distance from career staff, Harrington had made a point of eating in the employee cafeteria several times a week. Today, however, there was a palpable awkwardness as he moved through the space. Staff members who would normally greet him looked away. Conversations hushed as he passed. He selected his lunch and sat alone at a corner table, reviewing documents as he ate. "He's in an impossible position," Eleanor remarked, following Sarah's gaze. "Carrying out directives he may not fully support, facing the resentment of staff he's come to respect." "Don't waste sympathy on him," Michael countered. "He knew what he was signing up for when he took the job." Sarah wasn't so sure. The complexities of governance rarely aligned with the simplicities of campaign rhetoric. Even the most ideologically driven administrations encountered the messiness of implementation, the human costs of abstract policy decisions. After lunch, Sarah had a scheduled meeting with her team to discuss ongoing projects. 6 policy analysts reported to her, ranging from recent graduates to mid-career professionals. As they assembled in her office, she could see the question in their eyes, the uncertainty they were too professional to verbalize. "I know everyone's concerned about this morning's announcement," she began, addressing the elephant in the room. "I don't have any information beyond what Director Harrington shared. When I know more, you'll know more." She paused, considering her next words carefully. As a supervisor, she felt responsible for her team, yet she had no control over the decisions that would affect their livelihoods. "In the meantime," she continued, "we have work to do. The Renewable Energy Grid Integration Report is due to Congress in 3 weeks. Whatever changes may come, fulfilling our current obligations remains paramount." The team nodded, visibly refocusing on the tasks at hand. It was a testament to their professionalism, their ability to compartmentalize personal anxiety for the sake of public duty. Sarah felt a swell of pride, tinged with sadness at the possibility that this dedicated group might soon be disbanded. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah received an email requesting her presence at a senior staff meeting the following morning. The subject line was simply "Restructuring Implementation." That evening, the Bennett's townhouse in Arlington was quieter than usual. Their teenage children, sensing the tension, retreated to their rooms after dinner, leaving Sarah and James alone at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking," James said, refilling his coffee cup. "Maybe this is a moment to reassess. You've given 15 years to government service. That's a significant contribution." Sarah traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "Are you saying I should start looking for other options?" "I'm saying it might be worth considering. Not just because of the uncertainty, but because maybe there are other ways to make an impact." The suggestion wasn't unreasonable. James had made his own career transition 5 years earlier, leaving a position at the State Department for a role with an international development organization. The change had energized him, offering new challenges and fewer bureaucratic constraints. "I'll think about it," Sarah promised. "But I'm not ready to jump ship just because the waters are getting rough." Later that night, unable to sleep, Sarah scrolled through news coverage of the court decision. The ruling had reignited national debate about the proper size and scope of federal government. Conservative commentators celebrated the decision as a victory for taxpayers and a necessary check on bureaucratic bloat. Progressive voices warned of diminished government capacity and the loss of expertise in critical areas. Both perspectives contained elements of truth, Sarah reflected, yet neither fully acknowledged the human dimension, the lives and careers caught in the crossfire of ideological battles. The next morning's senior staff meeting conveyed the administration's urgency. Director Harrington, joined by representatives from the White House Office of Personnel Management, outlined the implementation timeline. Department-wide assessments to begin immediately, preliminary reduction targets by division within 2 weeks, initial notifications to affected employees within a month. "The White House is insistent that we move quickly," Harrington explained, looking uncomfortable with the directive he was delivering. "They believe prolonged uncertainty would be more detrimental to morale than swift execution." Sarah exchanged glances with colleagues around the table. The euphemisms were wearing thin. Swift execution meant fast-tracking the largest civil service reduction in modern history. As division heads, Harrington continued, you'll be asked to evaluate your operations and identify positions that could be eliminated with minimal disruption to core functions. This isn't a task any of us welcomes, but it's one we must approach with professionalism and fairness. After the meeting, Harrington asked Sarah to remain behind. When the room had cleared, he closed the door and sat across from her, his expression grave. I wanted to speak with you directly, Sarah. Your division is particularly vulnerable in this restructuring. Though she had anticipated this possibility, the confirmation still landed like a physical blow. Because of our focus on climate initiatives? Harrington nodded. The White House has made it clear that certain program areas are higher priorities for reduction than others. Renewable energy policy is not aligned with the administration's energy independence strategy. With respect, Director, energy independence and renewable development aren't mutually exclusive. Our work supports domestic energy production, just with a focus on sustainability. I understand that, Harrington replied, a hint of frustration in his voice. And in a different political reality, that nuance might matter. But we're operating in the environment we have, not the one we might prefer. He slid a folder across the table. These are the preliminary reduction targets for your division. 28%, including 2 senior positions. The number was even higher than she had feared. 28%? That's not streamlining, that's gutting the division. I fought for a lower number, Harrington admitted. This was the compromise. The initial target was 40%. Sarah opened the folder, scanning the document within. The clinical language belied the human impact. Positions eliminated, careers ended, expertise lost. And somewhere in these sterile projections might be her own professional fate. How do I explain this to my team? She asked, the weight of leadership suddenly feeling heavier than ever. With honesty and compassion, Harrington replied. The same qualities you've always brought to your work here. As Sarah left the meeting, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered to find herself speaking with Robert Castillo, a partner at Meridian Energy Consultants, a prominent private firm specializing in energy policy. Sarah, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, Castillo began. I imagine things are quite chaotic at DOE today. That's one way to put it, Sarah replied, wondering about the timing of the call. The news about the court decision has been everywhere. I wanted to reach out because Meridian has been following your work on grid integration for some time. We've been impressed. If you find yourself considering options outside government, I'd welcome a conversation. The offer wasn't surprising. Firms like Meridian often recruited from federal agencies, valuing the expertise and connections that career civil servants brought with them. What struck Sarah was the immediacy. Barely 24 hours after the court ruling, the private sector was already circling, ready to absorb talent displaced by political decisions. I appreciate the interest, Sarah responded carefully. I'm still processing everything that's happening here, but I'll keep your offer in mind. After hanging up, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. There was a certain validation in being recruited, a reminder that her skills and experience held value beyond her current position. Yet there was also discomfort at how quickly alternatives had materialized, as if her potential departure from public service was already assumed to be inevitable. Over the next week, a surreal atmosphere pervaded the Department of Energy. Work continued, reports were written, meetings held, decisions made, but beneath the veneer of normalcy ran an undercurrent of anxiety and resignation. Whispered conversations in hallways fell silent when supervisors approached. Retirement-eligible employees began quietly meeting with HR representatives. Some staff members cleared personal items from their offices, preparing for what they saw as the inevitable. In her division, Sarah maintained as much transparency as possible, sharing what limited information she had while trying to provide stability amid uncertainty. Her team responded with admirable professionalism, though she could see the strain taking its toll. The distracted looks during meetings, the dark humor that masked genuine fear, the occasional closed-door conversation from which a colleague would emerge with reddened eyes. 9 days after the court decision, an email arrived from Director Harrington's office, requesting Sarah's presence for a confidential meeting the following morning. The subject line contained only her name and employee ID number, a bureaucratic identifier that suddenly felt ominous in its impersonality. That evening, Sarah arrived home later than usual, having stayed at the office to complete a project review. She found James in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "You look exhausted," he remarked, setting down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables. Sarah dropped her bag on a chair and sank onto a bar stool at the counter. "Harrington wants to see me tomorrow morning. Private meeting." James's expression shifted, concern evident in his eyes. "Do you think—" "I don't know," Sarah replied honestly. "It could be about the division reduction plan. Or it could be more personal." James abandoned the dinner preparation and moved around the counter to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. You know that, right?" Sarah nodded, drawing comfort from the simple certainty of his support. Throughout their 20-year marriage, they had weathered numerous challenges. Career changes, family illnesses, the ordinary stresses of raising children while balancing two demanding careers. This latest uncertainty was just another chapter in their shared story. "Robert Castillo from Meridian called again today," she mentioned. "Asked if I'd consider meeting informally next week." "And will you?" Sarah considered the question. "I think I should. Not because I'm ready to leave DOE, but because it's prudent to understand my options." James nodded. "That makes sense. Though I have to admit, the idea of you working in the private sector would take some getting used to. You've always been so committed to public service." "Maybe too committed," Sarah conceded. "I've defined myself by this work for so long. Perhaps that's not entirely healthy." Later that night, after dinner and family time, Sarah sat alone in their home office, reviewing her professional history. 15 years at the Department of Energy, preceded by 3 years at a congressional committee and 2 at a policy think tank. 2 decades dedicated to advancing energy policies that balanced economic growth with environmental stewardship. Countless reports, briefings, and recommendations that had helped shape how America produced and consumed energy. What would it mean to step away from that work? To redirect her expertise toward private interests rather than public good? The questions felt almost existential in their significance. Sarah's reflections were interrupted by a text message from Eleanor, the department's lawyer. The appeals court rejected the union's request for an emergency stay. Implementation proceeds as planned. Another door closed. Another potential reprieve vanished. The reality of Agenda 47 was becoming increasingly concrete, transitioning from political rhetoric to lived experience for thousands of federal employees. Sarah arrived at work early the next morning, determined to face whatever awaited her with composure and dignity. She found the department building unusually quiet, the normal bustle of activity subdued. In the elevator, she encountered David Chen, the environmental scientist, his expression uncharacteristically somber. "Everything okay, David?" she asked as they ascended. He shook his head slightly. "Meeting with Deputy Director at 9. Pretty sure I know what it's about." Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. David had served the department for over 20 years, his expertise in environmental remediation informing countless policy decisions across multiple administrations. "I'm sorry," she offered, knowing the inadequacy of the words. David shrugged. "It's the way of things. Administrations change. Priorities shift. I've had a good run." His resignation seemed both admirable and troubling, a veteran civil servant accepting political realities with grace, yet perhaps too readily surrendering to decisions that undermined the government's ability to address complex problems. At precisely 10:30, Sarah knocked on Director Harrington's office door. His assistant ushered her in immediately, closing the door behind her. Harrington was seated at his desk, reviewing documents. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." She settled into the chair across from him, maintaining a calm exterior despite her racing heart. "I'll get straight to the point," Harrington began. "As you know, we're implementing significant personnel reductions across the department. These decisions are difficult and, in many cases, contrary to what I believe would best serve our national interests." He paused, his gaze direct. "Your position as division head for renewable energy policy has been identified for elimination in the restructuring plan." Though she had anticipated this possibility, the confirmation still felt like a physical blow. Sarah took a measured breath before responding. "I see. May I ask about the rationale?" The official explanation cites programmatic reprioritization and organizational streamlining, Harrington replied, his tone suggesting he found the language as hollow as she did. "The reality, which I'm telling you in confidence, is that your division's work is not aligned with the administration's energy priorities." "And the rest of my team?" "The division will be reduced by approximately 60%, with remaining staff reassigned to conventional energy policy or energy security divisions." The number was far higher than the 28% originally projected, a virtual dismantling of the division she had helped build over more than a decade. "That's considerably more than the department-wide target," Sarah observed, struggling to keep her voice even. Harrington nodded. "As I said, some areas are being hit harder than others based on administration priorities." A silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of decisions made in distant offices by people who would never meet those affected by their policies. "I want you to know," Harrington continued, his voice softening slightly, "that this is not a reflection on your performance or professionalism. Your service record is exemplary. In a different administration, with different priorities, your expertise would be highly valued." The assurance, while likely sincere, felt hollow against the reality of what was happening. Excellence and dedication had proved insufficient shields against political winds. When would this take effect? Sarah asked, focusing on practical details to maintain her composure. "You'll receive formal notification within the week. The standard procedure provides 60 days notice, though there is some flexibility if you need additional time for transition." Harrington hesitated, then added, "There's one other matter I wanted to discuss. The White House Personnel Office has asked me to identify exceptional career staff who might be retained in realigned positions. Your name was one I put forward." Sarah felt a flicker of surprise. "What kind of realignment?" "They're creating a new division focused on energy independence and regulatory efficiency. It would involve significant policy shifts from your current work, but would preserve your rank and salary." The offer presented a stark choice: adapt to a dramatically different policy agenda or leave government service entirely. It was a test of professional flexibility versus personal conviction, of pragmatism versus principle. "I appreciate the consideration," Sarah replied carefully. "I'd need to understand more about the role before making any decisions." Harrington nodded. "Of course. Take some time to process everything. We can discuss details later if you're interested in exploring that option." As Sarah left the office, she felt oddly calm, the certainty of bad news somehow less distressing than the preceding anxiety of uncertainty. The path ahead was unclear, but at least the ground beneath her feet had stabilized. She decided to take the remainder of the day off, sending a brief email to her team explaining her absence without sharing the details of her meeting. She wasn't ready for those conversations yet, for the questions and sympathy and uncertain reassurances. Instead, she walked along the National Mall, seeking perspective among the monuments to American ideals and achievements. The Washington Monument reached skyward, a testament to national unity and ambition. The Lincoln Memorial honored a president who had preserved the Union through its greatest crisis. The newest addition, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, commemorated a champion of justice and equality who had challenged the nation to live up to its highest principles. These edifices had witnessed countless shifts in political power, each transition bringing new priorities and policies. Yet the fundamental institutions of American governance had endured, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining core functions. Would the current administration's approach to civil service represent a temporary disruption or a more permanent realignment? The question had implications beyond individual careers. It touched on the government's capacity to address complex problems, the institutional memory needed for effective policymaking, the balance between political responsiveness and professional expertise. Sarah found herself at the steps of the Jefferson Memorial as afternoon shadows lengthened across the tidal basin. Inside, the rotunda's dome arched overhead, Jefferson's words inscribed in marble panels. "I am not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind." How would Jefferson view the current moment in American governance? The question had no simple answer. The same founder who had advocated for limited government had also recognized the need for institutions that could adapt to changing circumstances. As Sarah exited the memorial, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Eleanor. "I just heard," the lawyer said without preamble. "Harrington told you this morning?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Not unexpected, but still difficult to process." "I understand. Listen, a group of us are gathering at Capital City Brewing after work. Nothing formal, just colleagues supporting each other through this mess. You should join if you're up for it." Sarah hesitated, uncertain whether she wanted company or solitude. "Maybe. I'll let you know." By early evening, Sarah had decided to join her colleagues. The brewpub was crowded when she arrived, the after-work rush in full swing. She spotted the DOE group in a corner section, about 15 people from various divisions, some she knew well, others only by reputation. As she approached, conversations hushed briefly, then resumed with forced normalcy. Eleanor pulled out a chair beside her, and David Chen pushed a menu in her direction. "Glad you could make it," Eleanor said, genuine warmth in her voice. "We were just comparing notes on today's happenings." Around the table, Sarah recognized a shared experience reflected in her colleagues' expressions, the unique camaraderie of those navigating the same storm. Some had received notices similar to hers. Others remained in limbo, their professional fates still undetermined. A few, particularly those in areas aligned with administration priorities, appeared secure but conflicted about their relative good fortune. "Has anyone considered the reassignment option?" Sarah asked after ordering a drink. Harrington mentioned positions in a new division focused on energy independence. Michael, seated across the table, nodded. "I was offered something similar. Basically implementing regulatory rollbacks for fossil fuel development." "Are you taking it?" David inquired. Michael's expression tightened. "I haven't decided. 20 years until retirement makes it tempting to hold on, but I'm not sure I can realign my professional expertise with policies I fundamentally disagree with." The dilemma resonated around the table. The tension between career stability and professional integrity, between adapting to new political realities and maintaining personal convictions. "What about private sector opportunities?" asked Jessica, the budget analyst. "Any nibbles from the outside world?" Several people nodded, sharing stories of recruitment calls and informal inquiries from consulting firms, industry associations, and advocacy organizations. The massive restructuring had created a talent market, with private interests eager to capitalize on the displacement of experienced government professionals. As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted from immediate career concerns to broader reflections on public service and governance. These were people who had chosen government careers not for wealth or glory, but from commitment to something larger than themselves, whether ensuring energy security, advancing scientific knowledge, or developing policies that balanced competing national interests. "I keep thinking about what's lost in this process," Eleanor mused, nursing her second beer. "Not just individual careers, but institutional knowledge, professional networks, the subtle expertise that comes from years of working within complex systems." Administrations have the right to implement their policy priorities, David countered. That's how democracy works. Elections have consequences. Setting priorities is one thing, Michael replied. Gutting the government's capacity to analyze complex problems and implement nuanced solutions is another. The debate continued, reflecting tensions that extended far beyond their particular agency or the current administration. What was the proper role of career civil servants in a democratic system? How should professional expertise balance with political accountability? These questions had no simple answers, only trade-offs and compromises that shifted with changing political winds. Later that night, as Sarah prepared for bed, James asked about her day. She recounted the meeting with Harrington, the walk along the National Mall, the gathering with colleagues. "And how are you feeling about everything?" he inquired, his tone gentle. Sarah considered the question carefully. "Disappointed but not devastated. My identity isn't tied exclusively to my position. And maybe there's value in stepping back, reassessing what matters most in my professional life." "That sounds remarkably healthy," James observed with a smile. "Have you thought more about Harrington's offer of a reassigned position?" "I have," Sarah replied. "And I don't think it's right for me. The work would involve dismantling regulations I helped develop, policies I still believe are necessary. I couldn't do that with integrity." James nodded, understanding. "So what's next? Meridian? Maybe. Or one of the other firms that have reached out. But I'm also considering something different. Perhaps teaching or working with a non-profit focused on sustainable development." The conversation continued as they prepared for sleep, exploring possibilities rather than dwelling on what was ending. Sarah felt a growing sense of peace, recognizing that while one chapter of her professional life was closing, others would open. The following weeks brought a cascade of changes across the federal government. The implementation of Agenda 47 accelerated, with departments and agencies announcing reduction targets and beginning the formal notification process for affected employees. The American Federation of Government Employees continued legal challenges, but the courts consistently upheld the administration's authority to restructure the executive branch. At the Department of Energy, the atmosphere oscillated between resignation and resistance. Some divisions attempted to preserve institutional capacity by redistributing essential functions among remaining staff. Others saw more dramatic transformations, with entire programs eliminated or fundamentally reoriented to align with new priorities. Sarah received her formal notification exactly as Harrington had described, a standardized letter informing her that her position would be eliminated in 60 days due to departmental restructuring. The document felt strangely impersonal, reducing 15 years of service to administrative formalities and procedural requirements. She declined the reassignment option, instead focusing on ensuring a smooth transition for her team members who would remain in reorganized divisions. She conducted knowledge transfer sessions, documented ongoing projects, and advocated for junior staff who had demonstrated exceptional potential. 3 weeks before her departure date, Sarah accepted a position with the Energy Transition Institute, a non-profit research organization focused on developing policy frameworks for sustainable energy systems. The role offered less security than government service but greater intellectual freedom and the opportunity to continue working on issues she considered vital to national and global interests. On her final day at the Department of Energy, Sarah cleared her office methodically, sorting 15 years of accumulated documents, mementos, and personal items. The process was both practical and symbolic, cataloging a career while preparing for what came next. Director Harrington stopped by mid-afternoon, watching from the doorway as she filled a final box. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said. "Your professionalism throughout this process has been exemplary. Many others in your position might have checked out mentally weeks ago." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement. The work matters, regardless of personal circumstances. "I owed that to my team and to the public we serve." Harrington nodded. "If the political winds shift again, and they inevitably will, I hope you'd consider returning to public service. The government needs people with your commitment and expertise." "I wouldn't rule it out," Sarah replied honestly. "But for now, I'm looking forward to new challenges." As she carried the last box to her car, Sarah paused to look back at the Department of Energy building, a structure that had been the center of her professional life for 15 years. She felt a complex mix of emotions: nostalgia for what was ending, concern for colleagues facing uncertain futures, disappointment at interrupted work, but also curiosity about the path ahead. The implementation of Agenda 47 would continue, reshaping federal agencies according to the administration's vision of streamlined government. Debates would persist about the proper balance between political direction and professional expertise, between responsiveness to electoral mandates and continuity of government functions. For Sarah and thousands of other career civil servants affected by the restructuring, professional identities were being redefined, career trajectories redirected. Some would find opportunity in the private sector, others in academia or non-profit organizations. Some would return to government when circumstances changed. All carried forward the knowledge and experience gained in public service, applying it in new contexts. As she drove away from the department for the final time as an employee, Sarah reflected on a quote from her favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt: "Far and away the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing." The definition of work worth doing varied for each person, shaped by individual values, abilities, and circumstances. For Sarah, it had meant 15 years of public service at the Department of Energy. Now it would mean contributing to energy policy discussions from a different vantage point, bringing her expertise to bear on the same fundamental challenges through new institutional arrangements. The ruling against the union's challenge had cleared the way for the most significant restructuring of the federal workforce in modern history. But the story didn't end with a court decision or presidential directive. It continued in the professional journeys of thousands of dedicated individuals navigating changing political landscapes while maintaining commitment to their areas of expertise and the public good they sought to serve. As she merged onto the Roosevelt Bridge, leaving the monuments of Washington behind, Sarah felt neither defeat nor triumph. Simply the quiet certainty that while institutions and policies might change with election cycles, the fundamental work of governance continued, adapted to new circumstances but anchored in enduring national needs. The setting sun cast long shadows across the Potomac, the water's surface reflecting the fading light in shimmering patterns. Another day ending, another beginning on the horizon. The cycle of American governance continuing, evolving, persisting through changes both incremental and profound. Key vocabulary, repeated throughout. A civil service, The permanent professional branches of a government's administration, excluding military and judicial branches and elected politicians. A federal employee/civil servant. A person employed by the federal government in a non-elected position. Administration. The executive branch of government under a particular president. Executive authority. The power vested in the president to manage the operations of the federal government. A restructuring plan. A formal strategy to reorganize and change the structure of an organization. A reduction in force, RIF, the official term for laying off government employees due to lack of work, shortage of funds, or reorganization. An injunction. A court order requiring a person or organization to do or cease doing a specific action. An appeal. To take a case to a higher court for review of a lower court's decision. A union. An organization that represents workers in negotiations with employers over working conditions. A implementation. The process of putting a decision or plan into effect. A career staff. Government employees who maintain their positions regardless of which political party controls the executive branch. A political appointee. A person appointed to a government position by the president or other senior officials. Institutional knowledge. The combined experience, processes, data, expertise, and information possessed by an organization's members. A public service. Work that is performed for the benefit of the public or community. A agency/department. A division of government with defined responsibilities. Involuntary separation. Termination of employment that was not requested by the employee. A policy analyst. A professional who studies an. Thank you for joining us for today's story about Sarah Bennett and the sweeping changes to the American civil service. As we've seen through Sarah's journey, major government restructuring affects not just institutions but real people with careers, passions, and difficult choices to make. Stories like this one help us understand complex political and workplace situations while naturally building our English vocabulary. Did you notice how terms like civil service, restructuring plan, and institutional knowledge were naturally woven throughout the narrative? This is the power of learning English through compelling stories based on real-world events. If you found this story helpful for improving your English comprehension, vocabulary, and understanding of American government and workplace culture, please take a moment to thumbs up like this video to help our content reach more English learners worldwide. Speech balloon comment below with your thoughts on the story or any words and phrases you found particularly interesting or challenging. Counterclockwise arrows button. Share this video with friends who are learning English or interested in American politics and workplace dynamics. Bell. Subscribe to Story Driven English and hit the notification bell to never miss our weekly stories that blend language learning with engaging narratives based on current events. On our channel, we bring you carefully crafted stories inspired by real news events, designed specifically to enhance your English vocabulary, listening skills, and cultural understanding in context. Each week, we transform headlines into immersive narratives that make learning natural and enjoyable. Want to suggest a news topic for our next story? Let us know in the comments. Remember, consistent exposure to authentic, context-rich English is the key to language mastery. Join our growing community at Story Driven English, where we learn through the power of storytelling. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next story.